Well, it is a common moment when a minister returns back from a sabbatical time away that we take a moment, a sermon or 2 or 3 or 15, to digest what it is we experienced and try to bring it back to the church in a useful way. I am resisting the temptation this morning to show you my vacation slides in all their glory, but assuming that you will gain more value from something else. I know there's been a lot of life that happened when I was gone. Some of you were not here when I left and are wondering who this guy is. Hi. Some of our members have died. New babies have been born. People have moved and lost jobs and got sick and got better and everything in between. So I think about the goal that I took with me on sabbatical. It made sense to start once again with where I left, which was Thoreau and Walden. July 4th, 1845, Henry David Thoreau moved into a cabin that he built with his own hands, made out of used materials, on some land that he was kind of squatting on that Ralph Waldo Emerson owned. And he said that he went to the woods because he wished to live deliberately. He wished to put to rout all that was life, to drive life into a corner and discover what was real and what wasn't, and if it was real, to get to know its genuine meanness or its sublime nature. And I stayed in the city limits of Dallas for the same reason. My family and I wished to live deliberately here, to discover what it would mean to be involved with the rhythms of nature and in community with the people that are fellow citizens in our own city, but we didn't want to have to go to a cabin in the woods in order to do it. I wanted to live deliberately in relationship with the fellow citizens of this town and with the land under my feet, literally, in a more deliberate and, I hoped, meaningful and thoughtful way. This came out of a religious desire to waste less and build, create, grow, and share more. To be a participant in God's creation, not only a consumer of it. Now, this looked in some ways, my attempt to be more relationship with the citizens of Dallas was to try and move my Spanish skills along. I'm an intermediate speaker at best, and perhaps just a little better than that right now. But we have and we share this value of social justice, of working on behalf and with individuals in our community who face violence, oppression, injustice, poverty, and othering. And in this city, so often that ends up relating to people who speak Spanish. So I thought that in order to represent you and us and our values in the city, in order to be partners with people who I literally couldn't speak with before, for me, I needed to get better at the language. Now, the other part of my sabbatical was one that people have asked me a lot more questions about. They seem to understand what learning Spanish means. But people have asked me more questions about the desire to live a more sustainable and ecological life here in the city. And a lot of people were surprised at the idea that you could do such a thing. We called our project Walden at White Rock. We lived close to the lake. It was convenient. We named our son after Henry David Thoreau, and this poor kid doesn't stand a chance. We decided that we wanted to see what it was like for people who lived in a house like ours, in a neighborhood like ours, with a family like ours, to reduce all of our consumption by a quarter, by 25%. We thought that was a number that was small enough that we could maybe achieve it, and big enough that it sounded like we had achieved something. 5% didn't sound too much, and 50% didn't sound doable. And we hit all those numbers, I think, except for water. A pipe burst in our front yard a couple of months in and totally ruined all of my numbers and goals, and I will use that as my excuse for failing in that goal. But what we decided to do was take our life and turn it into a rhythm of being in touch with the natural elements. We decided to tend 2 garden beds so that we could grow more food than we were and buy less food than we were. We took the proceeds and the growth from our garden and shared them with friends who did the same with us, often enraging me that people who had decided to build a garden 3 weeks ago were bringing me this bounty while mine was like a little thing I was bringing to people. We made all of our own household goods. If it was a cleaner, or floor cleaner, window cleaner, carpet cleaner, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, laundry detergent, dish soap, chapstick, lotion, sunscreen, all of that. If you can think of something like that, we made it and traded and shared with our friends who then gave us feedback on what it meant, how that gift worked. Let me tell you, it's a good, trusted friend who tests your homemade sunscreen on their baby. That's a friend. That's a friend, and thank God it worked out okay. We decided to live more intentionally with the rhythms of nature by collecting rainwater and building compost, by riding a bike or walking or taking the train when we could instead of driving the car. I have a toddler in Dallas. We drove a car, but we drove less. We did little things that ended up making a big difference, like hanging our clothes on the line, riding a bike to the store. Little things that actually made a huge difference in those numbers. But I found almost overnight that my relationship with creation changed. Because when I decided to use a bike to get where I was going, to hang my clothes outside, to collect rainwater and grow food, suddenly I was paying a lot more attention to whether it was going to rain or not. The 10-day forecast became a good friend. The world around me started to look different. Ordinary things like a bar of soap or a head of lettuce became more than a transaction. When I used that soap to wash my hands or shave, I remembered that I had made that with my friend, and that we had talked about her parents the night we had made that batch, and that they had asked for some of it. And so when they came into town, we sat and talked about it and shared, and they had a farm on West Texas, and all of a sudden this thing was infused with relationship, with meaning and memory and value in a way that something I engaged in a transaction to get just didn't have. Now, it was less the things that became a part of our life that mattered and more the relationships. So I took a meeting with anybody who would meet with me. If I thought they were doing good work in the city of Dallas around ecological sustainability or alternative transportation or new urbanism or worms, hi Heather, I went to your class or called you and said, can we go have coffee? And almost everybody said yes. I discovered that within a few minutes bike ride of my front door, there is a robust, thriving community of people in our city who are changing the way it looks to be an urban dweller in the United States. Some of the most inventive, creative, innovative people in the country are doing their work here in Dallas, except we just don't see it when all we can see is 635 for downtown. I saw that in learning Spanish, increasing my Spanish relationships began to flourish where they weren't. If I was at the public library or a meeting at City Hall or in a restaurant or a store, I was literally able to have relationship and conversation with people that we would have sat next to each other and never spoken before. It seems so simple, but it was profound to me. I loved that members of my Spanish class came to the 10 o'clock service. I loved that in my class there was an immigration lawyer and a guy who goes to Royal Lane Baptist who's working with their justice and missions team and wants to partner with our church. Or a woman who, unprompted, in our class one day said, I want to tell you about this great grief class that's happening at First Unitarian Church. I think that's what she said. It was in Spanish. All of a sudden, these new relationships began to come out of nowhere. I saw kindred spirits. I met people who I thought I had very little in common with at an Anabaptist farming community outside of Waco called Homestead Heritage. If you've never been, go. It's an amazing place. And they party like it's 1899 there. They grow their own grain that they give to the cow, and when the cow eats that, they milk the cow, and they take that milk and they turn it into cheese, and it goes all the way through. They have blacksmiths and organic gardening and beehives, and it was amazing. People that live a very different day-to-day life than I do, and to have kindred spirits. It was the kind of place where when you say the word worm bin, they ask, how many? Or when somebody said, we're going to sell our house and buy some acreage in Uruguay to start a homestead, everyone in the room goes, yeah, that makes sense. These are hardworking people. The kind of people who, after a long day in the classroom, said to us, my teacher said, so today's work has been about really difficult manual labor. And if at the end of a day like this, you just want to relax and take the edge off, get out your whetstone and your scythe, and go out to the field and harvest, an acre or two of grain, and you're going to feel great. And I asked him, did you just tell me that to relax and take stress off, I should sharpen a scythe with a whetstone and harvest grain? And he said, yeah, it's like a dance you do. I had no idea I would find kindred spirits out there. People have been seemingly the most interested in the technical aspects. What did you learn? Where did you go? What did you do? But to be honest with you, that's not the most profound part of what I'm carrying back as my learning, as you might expect. For me, the changes that happened came about because a different rhythm of life required me to pay attention to parts of my own life that, quite honestly, I try to sweep under the rug or stay busy enough to ignore, or buy my way out of paying attention to. Taking things more slowly started to require me to pay attention to parts of my humanity that I wanted nothing to do with. Parts of me that I wanted to go to waste. First, I realized that I've been depending on my title and role to give me relationship with people. Most of my day outside my house is spent as a minister in the room. If I meet somebody for the first time, it's usually because I'm a minister in the room. And the people at story time at my local library and at the moms group that meets on Tuesdays down the street from my house don't care and required me to find a new way of connecting with them. I learned that I had become dependent on feeling like I had to be the competent one in the room in order to be worthy. Usually in this context, I'm speaking or talking on a panel, or someone comes to my office for advice. I've never been more incompetent than I was during the 5 months that I wasn't around here. I was breaking stuff and falling down and getting dirty and taking classes because I literally had no idea how to do what I needed to do. I had to learn how to be valuable in the room without being competent. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that that was a struggle, but it was. But most of all, a different rhythm of life slowed me down enough. And if you've ever done silent meditation or gone on a retreat, you know this to be true, like I know. When things get quiet enough, all those parts of yourself and your life that you don't have to pay attention to when you're busy just come bubbling up to the surface saying, I'm here. Let me tell you, it was like some sort of weird, twisted magic. If there was something I needed to deal with, some part of my personality that I'm not happy about or I wish would change, boy, it showed up. Sometimes I'd be thinking about something I wanted to change in myself, and literally my neighbor would order a book with the same title of that struggle, and it would get accidentally delivered to my front door instead. That happened more than once. Or people that I had struggled with in my life that I needed to get right with showed up. People I hadn't spoken to in years showed up and said, I'm here. Parts of me, parts of who I am as a human that I'd rather throw away, became loud and clear. And the value in all of this was learning to take those parts of me that weren't competent or strong or smart, the parts of myself that I didn't want to have anything to do with, and learn that they had a wholly creative use. I could use them to connect with other people in authentic, real ways. They were going to be the compost and the fuel that was going to turn me into a different and better human being. Not ignoring them, but learning from them. I discovered that no part of me had to go to waste. No part of us is waste. Here we are in this universe in which we know that's the case. In this beautiful cosmos in which everything gets turned into something else. Like my friend Angela's poem. Angela's a minister in Albuquerque, and she wrote that poem about being in the garden. I had so many experiences just like that, standing with my son, watching him tear into plants that weren't ready to be picked with his teeth, screaming, "Is it growed yet? Is it growed yet?" And that awareness of the beautiful warmth of the sun and this shared moment with my child, and knowing that in a short period of time, shorter than I want to really internalize, we will both be soil again, feeding the next generation. It made me think about this grace inherent in the cosmos. The fact that everything gives up its own self in order to turn into something else and does not ask for permission to do so. The star that exploded billions of years ago and became us did not get to decide that it was going to become us before it exploded. The cloud of hydrogen gas that billions of years ago, when left alone, turned into church choirs and operas and art and dictators and violence and trash and giraffes and balloons and song. In every stage of that process, when those atoms give themselves up again to become something else, they don't say, "but only if you're going to be." It's just grace. It's just all built on grace. And one day, soon, when the collection of atoms that holds your name goes back into the earth and turns into trees and skateboards and dictators and birds, we will not get to make a demand about what our atoms turn into. We will have to give our bodies back with no demand on what we will create. None of it will go to waste. Nothing will go to waste. I think it's easier to imagine that as this cosmic truth and to watch compost break down and turn into soil that grows plants that die and turn into soil. It's easier for me to see that than it was to get that internal piece, that those parts of me that I wanted to throw away had wholly creative power and use too. When Ralph Waldo Emerson stood at the Divinity School at Harvard University in 1838 and gave the graduation address, he really shifted the course of our faith by saying that the religion of the old had to die so that the religion of the new could live. He said he was sick and tired of the Unitarian religion of his day talking about miracles as if those miracles were somebody getting raised from the dead or water turning into wine. He said miracle is falling rain and growing clover. Miracle is a new baby. He said that a religion which does not realize that miracles are working in your body right now is, quote, corpse cold. And they didn't invite him to come back for a long time. He said the important thing about Jesus was not that he was holy, but that you are just as holy as he. He stood and said, look, the important thing about this teacher is that he got what you should get. You're a child of God. The same holy force which explodes stars and melts planets and turns into gravity and sunshine is as active in the atoms of your body as it's ever been. That's what religion should do, he said. Not to call us to remove parts of ourselves. The church isn't some... The church asks us to show up just as we are and use ourselves to build the common good and make our own days glad. Nothing goes to waste. No part of you is waste. It took me some sitting with, because I'm so used to getting along on my competency or being positive or showing up and having something to say. to really make sense that getting in touch with my pain was going to allow me to be more compassionate. Paying close attention to my grief, my real grief, was going to teach me to walk with somebody who was grieving. The parts of me that I don't want to see the lights of day, sometimes those are precisely the thing somebody else needs me to use. None of it waste. I have to say I was astounded at what's actually happening in our city. I know that our first impression in the world is not a place where a thriving community of people are radically rethinking an ecological response to urban life. I know this. I've lived here for a long time. But they are. And it is. All over the place, there are people rethinking what it means to live in cities. There are people teaching skills of how to connect with the earth and each other. People experimenting with gift-based economies. Working with the poor to be in touch with the land. There's so much happening here. And let me tell you how proud I was of this place. Because almost everywhere I went, every class or workshop or meeting for a cup of coffee, one of you was either there or had been the last person that the person I spoke to was with. It was amazing. I was almost getting sick and tired of seeing Unitarians everywhere. There you were. I hope that, yes, I've come back to this place as a person who's more fluent in Spanish, that I've able to connect with communities that are existing in poverty and injustice. Yes, I hope that I've come back as someone who has more skill sets around ecological living and care of creation than I can share and be in communication with you. But what I'm hoping is that this time has brought me back as a person who has a little more insight into how to use the wholeness of who I am to serve you. And how to walk with others in the wholeness of who you are to do our work. This call to build beloved community on earth, to be builders and makers of our communities, doesn't always look like it did with me. I know that. Sometimes it looks like classrooms or community meetings or caring for the sick or poor. It's not always a garden bed, right? But you don't have to have some part of you disappear before that's the work. You have to buy your fear away or buy away the parts of you that you feel are ugly or buy away your anxiety or your boredom. Nothing in you has to disappear before you're qualified for the work. None of you is waste. Everything in this universe can be put to work to heal and serve the world. For that, I am grateful. For all that is our life, we give our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift that we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. May it be so. Amen.